Good morning and welcome to Onward in Love and Caregiving. And also a very happy Pride to all of you. In fact, I'm wearing my stole from the Marble Collegiate Church, which was a gift when I retired from active ministry at the church. And I wore it last night, and I'll be telling you a little bit about that a little bit later. I'm Greg Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of GJP International, which is Greg Johnson Partnerships International, based here in New York City. I also have the privilege of serving as the chief advisor to the CEO of Emblem Health for family caregiving. Now, as you know, this is a series of programs that have been being done for now over 3 years. They began actually at my home in Bali, and I'm hoping yet this year to get back and have a little bit of time right there by the Indian Ocean. But in the meantime, we continue these programs, and the gift is it allows us to have conversations about family caregiving, faith, and spirituality, sharing our many, many journeys. One of the journeys, certainly, for me, has been the world of pride. As a gay man, as a 75-year-old man, the COVID experience was not the first pandemic. Like many others, I had lived through, as did they, through the AIDS pandemic. And because this is the first program in the month of June 2022, I'm going to devote this program to talking about the two pandemics, those things which were most unfortunate, those things that were good that came from it, and the things that we've learned from it, because they have been two pandemics in one lifetime. And I've been asked by a number of persons to speak on this topic. And I thought, well, I really ought to do one of the programs. And I thought the perfect way to begin would be to begin the first program in June, as we say, Happy Pride. Now, before we go into this program, I want to take just one moment, as we always do, to have a moment of reflection, a moment of prayer. And certainly here in America, and we ask the rest of you to join us, that some sense may come to those in charge here in America, that the gun violence, which is claiming too many lives, again last night in Oklahoma, it's extremely, extremely sad. And so we want to remember, particularly those in Uvalde, which is where that horrible shooting occurred, the massacre of the school children. The funerals have begun, and we want to uphold and surround in love all of those who are suffering. And I can't think of any better prayer than one that has been probably my most favorite prayer. I've been privileged to pray it with many, many people. I first learned of it from a rather noted clergy person, and I learned it as he was dying. And it's always stayed with me, and I've shared it with many others, and so I share it with you today. Let us just take a moment to center ourselves, to go to that spark of the divine within us, by whatever name you may call that spirit of the divine, of God, Allah, Yahweh, so many other names, the higher power, the great spirit. And let us pray together. O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in thy mercy grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last, we pray in all the holy names of God. And together we say, Amen. Among the things that I've been asked to do recently through our wonderful PR department at Emblem Health, I was asked to consider writing an essay, as it were, a piece to be circulated, and I've done that. Also, that resulted from a conversation at Emblem. We're blessed to have many ERGs, employee resource groups. One of them is called PRISM, and it's the LGBTQAI plus, friends and allies as well. And we, in addition to having some extraordinary programs and to doing volunteer work and to stepping up to needs that are being made, as well as being a sounding board for the corporation, which is so important, as to what does our world, the LGBT world, look for in healthcare, in insurance? What are the issues that are most important, and are they being met? In addition to, of course, the conditions within a workplace, and Emblem Health is stellar when it comes to that. I've been there for a very long time and look forward to continuing. It's a blessing beyond all words. So one of the things that we do with the ERGs is we have some chats. And so at the end of last month, in preparation really for Pride Month, we had a conversation about the two pandemics, and that's really where all of my thinking began. So I wanted to just put that in perspective. Now, first of all, the first thing that immediately comes to my mind is both pandemics were shrouded in mystery. And what do I mean by that? Their origins. With the AIDS crisis, it was either Haiti or it was Africa, and there was all sorts of horrible conversation that resulted from that, just as the Chinese and Wuhan were the center of focus at the beginning, and unfortunately it continues, but at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So both of them began in that sort of an atmosphere. And what does that sort of an atmosphere do? Well, that sort of an atmosphere always creates that world of us and them, us and them. And as we all know, we get nowhere when we're in that sort of mentality. So thanks in both cases to the healthcare systems and the medical systems who stepped up and said, no, we need to know we are all in this together. It's a we. And as I have often said on this program, we need to go from I to we. And what does that mean? It means we go from illness to W-E, wellness. And when people are working together, that indeed becomes one of the most important strategies with whatever the topic might be. Now, in the world of government, both pandemics were impacted by government, and they would naturally be because they're within a country and the country is the government. Well, sadly, in the AIDS crisis, there was very, very minimal, if any, support from the government at the beginning. It was a very sad time. It was a time of denial. It was the time of Reagan and Reaganomics, and nothing was being said and very little help was being given. It's a blot on that administration. In this case, with COVID, we had a lot of support from medical groups. We had a lot of support finally from government, but it was politicized and it was much, much wasted time. And I fear wasted lives because of the politics from the past administration. Who were the people who stepped up and got things moving? It was indeed the healthcare systems. I will never forget the experience here in New York of having Central Park turned into a hospital center, of having a major ship, having the Javits Convention Center. But the healthcare systems stepped up. And it was a difficult time in both situations, because in both situations we were learning about a disease for which there was not a cure, and therefore, and it's true, AIDS has come a long way in the development of treatments. HIV/AIDS has come a very long way, but it still exists and research is being done. And I am of the opinion that we're going to continue the same with the world of COVID and its many variations that continue to come forward. Now, those were difficult parts. Also, there was enormous deaths. And death is not a topic that America has ever done well with. My beloved Indonesia in Bali, the fluidity between life and death and that curtain of the eternal and the present is such a blessing. But here we tend to deny it. And that's a great sadness. And I fear that in many cases, the church has not helped either to talk about the topic of death. But the truth is, each and every one of us is born to die. We come into this world by what? We take a breath. The Ruach Elohim, the breath of God in Hebrew. But in every tradition, man breathes his first. The spirit comes in. And what do we say at the other end of life? We say he breathed his last, and the spirit returns. So one of the things that both of these pandemics, and I have been privileged to hear so many stories, and I always consider it a privilege and a blessing when people want to talk with me, particularly on the topics of death, dying, and grief. And we have spent a lot of time on that. The one thing that I noticed throughout all of it, and I have always noticed this in my grief counseling, when we're willing to look at the finitude of life, first of all, the life becomes much more precious, and we live into it. We live into quality, not quantity. And the quality doesn't have to be perfect, but it is quality, not quantity. But there's something else that happens. Very often, people are willing to consider that just maybe, and I don't know if you haven't done this, think about it. Perhaps we aren't human beings trying to have a spiritual experience. Rather, we are spiritual beings having come from and returning to. And you have a lifetime to put nouns to that. But presently, we are locked in time and space. And it is that at which we are looking. So there is no question that death was something that united both. And there were many, many, many deaths. And there continue to be from the COVID. It is not over. And particularly for seniors like me, some of the variations are quite serious. So listen up to the advice of our medical teams. Now, out of both of these crises came two items that I want to particularly focus on because they're about family caregiving. And the first, I've just said it. Family caregiving. The AIDS crisis, it is a gift from the LGBT world to the world of healthcare and sociology. A new term was coined, family of choice. And it doesn't mean that LGBT gay people are the only ones with families of choice. I'll speak of that in a minute. But the word family of choice became a sociological word that is used within the healthcare systems. Now, why and how did that come about? Well, basically in life, we all have two types of family. We all have a blood family. That family, is our family of origin. Some have been wonderful relationships, some have been very challenging, but they are a fact. It's where our lives began. In the AIDS crisis, and this was something that I saw again and again, as we spent time in the hospitals, as we stood in the presence and surrounded literally by death, holding the hand of one person who had just died, while holding another of someone who is about to die. To learn a lot. It's power. And yet we can love them into eternity. And that's what was happening by this strange and unusual allotment of people. People who were neighbors, who were friends, lovers, partners, people from 12-step groups, people from churches, people from other organizations were coming to hospitals and hospices and homes. And while they were there showing enormous compassion and love, on many occasions, and I witnessed it frequently, families of origin arrived. And they arrived to find out two pieces of information that they were totally unable to deal with. Number one, their child was gay, and number two, about to die. And in many, many cases, they fled. In many others, their hearts were open. And I always like to make sure I have said that. But in many cases, they fled. And who was left? It was this assortment of people. Now, medical personnel always want to document and must document everything that's going on. Well, who was this group of people? It wasn't a family. It wasn't certainly immediate family, but it was a family of choice. And so we were blessed in the AIDS crisis to contribute a new term that said, no one needs to be alone. We can have a family of choice. If our family of origin simply doesn't get it or is simply unable to understand, there are others who do understand and are willing to share their love. Now, I said to you that family of choice is not an LGBT word. It began, but all of us has that. In fact, I'm sitting right now, as you know, in my apartment house in Chelsea, in New York City, in Manhattan, the Empire State Building's right over there. So you know where I am. 20 stories. We have a caregiving committee in this building because we are a family of choice. We chose to live here. So are faith groups, so are political groups. I frankly think that corporations like Emblem Health are families of choice. We chose to work there and we were chosen to work in that environment. And that's why these ERGs, these employee resource groups, are so important, because they allow for all people to be their authentic selves and be honored for that, and allow us to make contributions to life based on who we are spiritually, physically, and emotionally. So it is an enormous gift that has come to us, and I hope you'll share that. Now, where does the caregiving come in COVID-19? Everywhere is the answer. We all became caregivers. We may not have used that word, but many of us were caring for multiple people. Many of us were doing things we had never, ever done before. All of us were involved in caring for others. As Ram Dass said, what is our purpose in life? We're here to walk each other home. And during the very high death tolls, where many people could not be with their loved ones. It was very telephonic, and we learned a great deal about technology. We learned a lot about telemedicine. There were lots of things that we learned and we are learning from still. But one of the great things was that in the absence of being able to walk with someone with their loved one, we were able to walk with the loved one so that they were not alone. And that is a powerful, powerful gift. It is indeed another face of family caregiving. So, as we have seen, we all became caregivers in new ways beyond anything that we were doing. We continued to, of course, send out more literature, to do support groups. I was privileged to do nearly 1,000 one-on-ones during that entire period. And of it, 40% of them were definitely dealing with death, dying, and grief. And we know, because we've talked about that, that's an equally important piece of family caregiving. A company like Emblem, with its many resources, opened up some of its centers in new ways using technology. We all began to create new and effective ways to say you're not alone. Support groups went online. And no matter where it was, new and diverse ways were happening. In the project we talked of last week with our wonderful friends from BLN, there again, we were having the opportunity of doing new curricula and doing new support groups. We created Coffee and Caregiving. Everybody had their cup of coffee from the kitchen, so we simply sat and talked. We shared what had happened. We shared the frustrations of not being able to be where we really wanted to be physically, but having to use technology in order to meet standards. So these are just some thoughts that I have. Last night at the Marble Collegiate Church, and I'm going to conclude with this because it was really very powerful, I had the great privilege of being invited to participate in their AIDS memorial. It was June 1st, and it was also the 30th anniversary of the founding of GIFTS. GIFTS is an acronym that stands for Gays in Fellowship, Tradition, and Service. 30 years ago, we were all gay. We weren't LGBTQIA. All of the alphabet, that hadn't come out yet, but we were gay. And so I had the privilege of being with others, part of the founding team, and Marble was way ahead of its time. And today that ministry continues. So last night, we had a very special service done by some of the marvelously talented people and the clergy at the Marble Collegiate Church. And I was deeply honored to be asked to read a blessing that was written by one of our LGBT members, Stan Williams. He wrote a very beautiful blessing because in honor of the Pride 2022, Marble has in its sanctuary, one on the north wall and one on the south wall, each side a panel from the famous AIDS quilt. Now, there are many, many, many panels, but these two huge panels are now hanging for the entire month of June 2022 in the sanctuary at the Marble Collegiate Church. And if you haven't seen any of them, I urge you to go by Fifth Avenue and 29th Street, stop by, come for a service, come by and ask to see the panels. It's a very moving experience. And so last night I was given the opportunity and the honor to read this blessing, and I loved it so much because it really brought back a lot of memories, but it also paralleled some of these things that I have been talking about. And so I've decided, because we're family of choice, to read this as our closing this morning. This is the blessing of the AIDS Quilt Marble Collegiate Church, New York City, June 1st, 2022. Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity of gathering on the first day of Pride Month, 2022. And we thank you for the opportunity of having in our presence a very small portion of the AIDS Memorial Quilt that pays tribute to the tens of thousands of souls who are no longer with us on this earth, but with you in eternity. As we marvel at the beauty of this quilt, we ask you to bless it so that we may remember those in our community who are represented on various panels. And we ask that you bless these and all panels as reminders of all the names that remained etched upon our hearts forever. As we gaze upon these panels, we ask you to bless the memory of the beautiful ones who danced from dusk till dawn on Fire Island, the sweet ones who held our hands discreetly under a coat in the movie cinema, the brave ones who took to the streets, act up, fight back, fight AIDS, the perceptive ones who gave us discreet glances in the office, letting us know we were not alone. The courageous ones who boldly presented themselves in the way that they, and you saw, are. The quiet ones who spent their final days with family who didn't always accept them, and others who chose loving families of choice. The fearful ones who we will never know, who because of their shame kept their diagnosis secret. The fabulous ones who ruled the stage and screen only to see their lights dimmed way too soon. The creative ones who filled our lives with art, music, dance, and fashion until their very last days. The caring ones who called us every day just to catch up on the day's gossip. The knowing ones who took us under their wings when our parents didn't know quite what to do with us. We ask you to bless the souls represented on this quilt, their loved ones and their families. We ask you to bless the hands that made these panels. Bless all the loved ones we knew and the names that only you know. Thank you, God, for these sacred memories, because these memories have made us who we are today. We thank you for doctors, the scientists, the caregivers, the activists, and the leaders who have made a difference in the battle against AIDS and HIV, and for the survivors who are thriving in our presence on this very day. Loving God, we ask you to pour out your blessing upon this quilt, upon Marble, upon our entire LGBT community, our families, both of origin and choice, and our allies as we enter into this month of Pride. For we know that in both challenging times and on those glorious days filled with celebration, you welcome us into your love, just as you made us in your image. You are with us and within us forever, and we give thanks. Amen. Thank you for joining me this morning, and I want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful weekend, a wonderful week to come, and I look forward to your joining us on future broadcasts. And as we always say, onward in love and caregiving. Namaste. God bless, and thank you for being with us.